always better when you apply via referral versus applying on your own, right? Even if it's like slightly better, I would recommend that. So they assign a person to you and they like guide you through, help you through all the way. So until you like settle into your final home. So it's not just them taking you to London, it's actually them taking you to
Oh,
your permanent address of sorts, right? So it was very well assisted. So yeah, they take care of the flights, take care of the accommodation, visa is sponsored, and yeah, I think I could not think of a thing that I needed help on, which they did not like themselves propose to help with, right? So Meta focuses a lot on like accuracy. So
mhm.
you don't have a lot of room to make mistakes, right?
Okay.
That's what I've kind of realized. So
Hmm.
speed and accuracy is very important.
Mhm.
Complexity, I would say, is like all right, not crazy. Google to compare, right? There's a UX engineer pipeline in which if you go through UX engineering, you probably
Mhm.
have to stick to like that space, right? But in
Got it.
Meta, even if you like get hired through the front-end pipeline, you're just like a software engineer for them. You can work wherever.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Check the Interview series. Today we have a very special guest, Abhishek. So he's one of my friend and colleague from Flipkart. So right now he is working as a software engineer at Meta Facebook. So we are going to discuss a lot of stuff, not just getting into the Facebook, like in terms of giving the interviews, what are the process and whatnot, but also once you get into the company, what are the expectations you should have basically in order to keep growing once you join. So with that, let me invite Abhishek. Hey Abhishek, how are you doing?
Hey, hi, Chirag. Thank you so much for bringing me on the show. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, glad to have you. I think many people are going to be very excited because Meta is again dream for many of the many of the people basically. So I think this podcast, this discussion is going to be very fruitful for most of them. So before we start, why don't you just talk about your brief journey about how did you started your career?
Yeah. So I graduated in 2015, so it's been a while. So I've been working for like 8 years. And before this, so I graduated from like electronics engineering, which quite a lot of us do, right? It's not like you need a CS degree anymore. It's been a while. So but yeah, through my college, I was very interested in like coding. So I just somehow got into my first job, which was a very okay job, I would say. Like it was just a small startup. So I worked on startups like for a couple of years. And then I was like, yeah, I've seen all of this, right? I've seen the chaos. Now I just need something big. So that's when I like decided to get into Flipkart, which was, I think, a big break for me. So it was like not the easiest thing. And at that point in time, I think Flipkart was my dream company. And at some point, I think it became Meta. So I got into Flipkart around 2017. So it was again quite a while back. I stayed there for like 3, 4 years. I think that's where I think I grew the most and I learned the most. It was, I think, I would say the highlight of my career until now. And then, yeah, I think once I outgrew, I think Flipkart, then I was like, what next? So then I sort of said, I guess it's time to like maybe apply globally and why not like Meta, why not Spotify or anything, right? Then yeah, I could not really actually get into Meta right away. I had to like take a
Mhm.
pit stop at Uber for a year, and then I finally got to Meta. So it's been a journey. I've switched quite a lot of companies, but yeah, I kind of had to.
Awesome, awesome. I can see the way you have taken that journey. Whatever you have best at the plate, let's take it. But you have that the goal very clear that boss, this is a matter that need to be cracked and that you did it. And one thing which
Yeah,
I completely relate with, like Flipkart has been a main career changer for most of us, and even I can resonate with that. The kind of a learning, kind of a growth that I have seen in as a person is tremendous. So I think
yeah,
we
yeah,
all know what Flipkart basically have basically shown on us.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, why don't you talk about your journey into Meta? Like, how did you apply? What are the process that you followed? And finally, how did you got into the Meta?
Yeah. So basically, to apply, I think over time I realized like I had built a fairly strong resume by working Flipkart for a while, building a good network, right? But I think already had people in Meta, which I knew, and it's always better when you apply via referral versus applying on your own, right? Even if it's like slightly better, I would recommend that. So I did that. I applied via referral, and it was
Mhm.
like in 2020, and I
Okay.
pretty much like next day got a rejection that we are not hiring anymore. So it was a bummer. So then at that point in time, I was like, I'm in the groove. I'll probably make a switch anyways, right? So I
Yeah.
joined Uber, and in just a few months, I basically got a call back from them. So it was from my initial referral.
Oh.
So it was just like 4 months into Uber, and they were like, "We are now hiring. So why don't you interview with us?" Right? So yeah, I was like, "Yeah, I've just switched my job. Why should I or should I not?" But then I was like, I won't probably get the chance again, right?
Yeah.
So I interviewed with them. So I'll tell you how the process worked, right? So it was
Mhm.
like I will just give you a rough timeline. So I started the
Mhm.
process in March of the year, And in the beginning, it's basically just a casual chat where they tell you like, just try to understand if you are a good fit. It's very casual conversation with the recruiter. And
Mm-hmm.
once that is done, the process goes like this. So they will have a screening round in the beginning. And once you clear the screening, there will be like on-site rounds. So it's not like in a lot of companies, there are elimination rounds, right? One after the
Right.
other. So this one is that screening is the elimination round. If you get through it,
Mm-hmm.
you will be doing all the on-site rounds for sure. So that's how
Oh,
it works. Yeah.
awesome,
So for
awesome.
me, yeah. So to elaborate on this, so it's a fairly long process in terms of timeline. So
Mm-hmm.
once you're done with your initial screening, so for me there were actually two screenings. So
Mm-hmm.
they're looking for like very strong signals that they want to be very sure that if we are
Mm-hmm.
investing in this person to get them through all the rounds, they should be good.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, they were probably dicey for some reason, and I had to give like another screening, which I was like,
Okay.
yeah, this is like a second chance of sorts, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I honestly, I took like a couple of weeks this time around that I'll nail it down this time. So I took
Okay.
my second screening in like a few weeks, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that time it went pretty perfectly, and I was like, yeah, I'm probably gonna get the on-site rounds. So
Mm-hmm.
then it's now they ask you for your schedule. You can just like schedule their rounds the way you wish to, right? You can do them all in a single day. You can do them like a week after week. So
Mm-hmm.
I, at that point in time, if I'm being honest, I was very, put my eyes on like I have to get into Meta. So I
Yeah.
wasn't taking any chances, and I intentionally like took time and I scheduled all my
Mm.
interviews like one week after the other. So every
Got
interview
it.
had a week's gap. Uh, so in terms of the rounds on the on-site, there are like four rounds.
Mm-hmm.
So there are like two coding rounds. So in which you
Mm-hmm.
basically do hands-on coding. So it's basically problem solving. I can
Mm-hmm.
probably deep dive into that later. And then there is a standard system design round, which has become very common, right? So it was a UI focused system design round.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is this final round, which is which Meta calls behavioral round, which a
Mm-hmm.
lot of companies do call it like a hiring manager round.
Mm-hmm.
But Meta as such does not like have a hiring manager because we don't
Mm-hmm.
get hired into a team. We just get hired into Meta, and then eventually we find a team. So yeah, that's the whole thing. But it's essentially like a HM round.
Got it. And in how
Yeah.
many days basically you got the offer letter approximate after all of your rounds
Yeah.
basically clear?
So I think again, I would tell you a typical timeline and my timeline because my case somehow ended up being not the standard case. So I ended my interviews and I was supposed to like know it in a week, but
Uh-huh.
there was so much chaos going on back then because there was a lot of hiring going on in like
Mm-hmm.
21. So I got my offer like around 3 weeks later, which was
Okay.
quite a lot of time, and I was like, it was a very anxious period of time for me.
Yeah, yeah.
But typically it's like a week or two. People get it in a week or two.
Got it. So in total, if you see, it was the entire process was couple of months. So where you have
Yes.
intentionally taken up the alternate weeks as sort of, but in general, from the discussion to the end, it takes around couple of months in order to complete that.
Yeah, typical timeline is like I would say 2 to 3 months. It all gets wrapped up.
Awesome, awesome. This was quite interesting, I think. And what about
Yeah.
like when you got the offer letter? Then how did you plan to go to basically London? Obviously, so was it all sponsored by the company? How that went basically?
Yeah. So I think again this was super smooth. I mean, as so I'll tell you, right. So I probably domestically moved a couple of times. I moved from college to join my first company and all that. I would say that was a lot more difficult than this move. This was I had to use like none of my brain at all, right? So there was someone, so they assign a person to you and they
Okay.
like guide you through, help you through all the way. So until you like settle into your final home. So it's not just them taking you to London, it's actually them taking to
Oh.
your permanent address of sorts, right? So it was very well assisted. So yeah, they take care of the flights, take care of the accommodation, visa is sponsored, and yeah, I think I could not think of a thing that I needed help on, which they did not like themselves propose to help with, right? So it's completely covered. Honestly, yeah,
This is something interesting and crazy because
yeah,
if your employer is actually drilling into that level, it means something, man. And obviously,
yeah,
meta
yeah, yeah.
being meta, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that back then it was the glory days. Now that's still the companies I think are back on track, but I think it's probably never gonna be that good. It's still very good. But yeah, back then it was like you ask for something, you'll get it.
Awesome, awesome. So
Yeah.
many people are again interested. Can you help on some of the kind of questions basically which are asked in different rounds basically that we have, so that people
Yeah, yeah.
get a rough idea about what are the expectations?
Sure. So I'll probably just start with the screening round itself because I think it's a very important round. You have to get through it, right? So the stakes are a bit higher. So uh, just to compare with usual front-end interviews, right? So I have interviewed at quite a few places and I have like over time kind of built a mental model that how the interviews look like. So usually now we have this front-end focus like UI rounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where like there are like JavaScript based questions, sorts of those sorts of questions, right? And then a
Mm-hmm.
lot of companies have like these typical DSA questions
Yeah.
around just to ask like raw DSA questions, right? So I think Meta sort of have a different pipeline for front-end engineers. So I
Uh-huh.
was hired into a front-end. So there's a UI pipeline, UI engineer
Right.
pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
We have a slightly different process than like you would say back-end engineers or like
Mm-hmm.
general engineers, right? So the coding rounds are a mix of data structures and front-end problems. So it will
Mm-hmm.
be like basically it will be always be problem solving. They will never
Mm-hmm.
like quiz you on any concept or ask you any like what is the event loop or stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
They will not even get into it. It will always be like the round starts and they will give you a problem. So this
Mm-hmm.
problem would not be super difficult. It will be front-end focused,
Mm-hmm.
but it also involve like data structures, right? So to give you an example,
Mm-hmm.
as a general example, right, they will ask you to create an event emitter, right? Now,
Uh-huh.
this is something you would probably need to implement at a library level in front end,
Correct.
but this also is something that requires knowledge of like queues, tags, basic data structures, right?
Right.
So they're trying to look for a person who is like who is a problem solver, right? They
Mm-hmm.
have all the web fundamental basics
Mm-hmm.
and they can like put these together to solve a problem. So, and to give a very general guidance on this, I think there's a website called bigfrontend.dev, which a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
I think, already
Yeah.
know at this point. It was not that popular back then when I like was interviewing,
Yeah.
uh, but that is a very good reference for what kind of problems you can expect because it
Mm-hmm.
has those kind of questions. So this is uh, the coding round and the screening round. So they are very
Got it.
similar in nature. It's
Mm-hmm.
just different problems, right? And another thing to highlight, I would say, is that so Meta focuses a lot on like accuracy. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a lot of room to make mistakes, right?
Okay.
That's what I've kind of realized, and that's what was in my mind when I was preparing. So you are supposed to get things right most of the time, like in the first go, though it's
Mm-hmm.
not like a hard requirement. Even if you
Mm-hmm.
don't, the focus a lot is on like how do you work with the interviewer and how do you fix the problems, right?
Got it.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but it's always like bonus if you get it right the first time because
Mm-hmm.
honestly, there's no time. So usually it's
Hmm.
like a 35-minute interview,
Okay.
the core of the interview, and you
Uh-huh.
are supposed to do like 2 to 3 problems. So you
Uh-huh.
don't have the time. I think that's the whole thing. So
Hmm.
speed and accuracy is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Complexity, I would say, is like all right, not crazy.
Got it.
Yeah,
Got it. Got it.
yeah,
Awesome. So you also talked about like DSA round, right? So do they have explicit DSA round, or you mentioned you have a coding round that is the combination where expectation is
yeah.
mix of both?
So I think for Meta, even I would say they have explicitly they say there is no DSA. There won't be any such problems. There will always be like a practical problem. So there are coding rounds which are multiple, but they
Mhm.
only cover like front end focused problem solving.
Which
So no DSA.
internally evolves your DSA concepts.
Yeah, but I think it's always about, there will never be like it's a clearly a dynamic programming question and stuff like that, right?
Got
It'll
it.
always involve concepts of like data structures and all that. But on the surface, it'll look like a front end problem.
Awesome. You also mentioned about system design round, right? So what
Yeah.
are the expectation in that particular round, basically?
Yeah, so I think this sound also is slightly different in how Meta does it.
Mm-hmm.
So usually I would say system design rounds are a conversation between interviewer and the interviewee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in Meta, I think the expectation somehow, I'm not sure of the reasons because I never got a chance to like interview people.
Yeah.
But it's that you as the candidate are driving the interview. So you're
Okay.
just given a very high level problem.
Mm-hmm.
So basically the whole thing would be how do you drive the conversation, whichever direction you want to take, it's fine because they're
Mm-hmm.
not looking for something objectively correct, right?
Got
They're
it.
just saying
Mm-hmm.
how do you like go through the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And otherwise, I think the topics and the things you need to like work on to like get good at it are similar. So like
Mm-hmm.
other companies basically. So there could be like a low level design question. So
Mm-hmm.
something like design a filters panel on an e-commerce website, right? So it's
Got
a
it.
bit of a
Mhm.
low level question where you like describe how it interacts with other components, stuff like that.
Correct.
Then there could be something like you have to design, let's say, Pinterest, which is like a very
Uh-huh.
image heavy website, or like
Correct.
design Twitter, which is a very
Uh,
text heavy website, right? So it's a
correct.
very broad problem. then it's up to you where do you take it, right? You can make assumptions and then you
Hmm.
can like take it to a very particular direction. I think your expectation is primarily that you know the trade-offs that you make, you can justify, right? And you're not just like, picking one thing and just going ahead with it, right? You
Correct.
always
Correct.
have to call out that what do you considered, why did you go
Yeah.
with something and stuff
Hmm.
like that. So it's usual, I would say, yeah.
Got it. So to summarize, I hope the expectation is bit in terms of, are you aware of multiple options that you have, and are you taking a cautious decision in terms of whatever assumption you are making?
Right,
It
right.
can be some trade-off depending on current system that you are working upon, or the ecosystem, or the team, or it can be any constraint which is actually helping you to make, or like forcing you to make those assumptions, basically, right?
Yes, yes.
And obviously, because you go as a system, or you can say as a software engineer at big companies, then the expectation is, if a high level problem statement is there, how do you get into the granular level details of that, right?
Right, right.
Where if we start with the idea, can you come up with some powerful solution which can help people and business end of the day? So that is something very interesting thing. Now we talked
Yeah.
about, okay, how to get into the company, right? How to get into the meta. But what happens once you join the meta? Probably the kind of interviews that you have given and the kind of work that you are doing, definitely there will be deltas over there. So probably, would you like to share some insights on that?
Sure, sure. Yeah, so I think that's been very interesting for me. I think so in the past I have pretty much always like given a front end interview and sort of landed into a front end role, right? Where in terms of what I do is always front end, but there was a huge gap between the interview itself and the work itself, right?
Yeah.
Here things have been interesting. In terms of at least the interview, I would say was probably one of the most practical ones I've done ever. So it was very front end focused, right? But if we talk about the job itself,
Hmm.
so in Meta, there's like a common hiring pipeline. So in Google to compare, right? There is a UX engineer pipeline in which if you go through UX engineering, you probably
Hmm.
have to stick to like that space, right? But in
Got it.
Meta, even if you like get hired through the front end pipeline, you're just like a software engineer for them. You can work wherever.
Oh, this is
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, so it's basically what you prefer, what is your core area of expertise, get interviewed by that, get inside Meta and do whatever you wish to. You can be an Android engineer, no one is going to question you that. So
Oh,
that's
awesome. That is something interesting. Yeah.
yeah. And in terms of the work, so I think there are teams. So in Meta, I'll say foundationally, there are like a lot of frameworks built, like very abstract solutions, which enable you to like build products, right? So as an engineer, we have like a concept of product generalists and
Hmm.
like system generalists, right? So system generalists and folks who work on infra build all these
Hmm.
underlying frameworks. And like for me, so I am a front-end engineer, or also you can say a product generalist. So
Hmm.
we build products on these frameworks, right?
Business
So
use
in
cases
terms
basically on top of
business,
the, yeah.
yeah. So a lot of things are abstracted. So things are somehow sometimes so simple that if you want to build a very simple web page, right,
Hmm.
anyone can do it. So it's like
Got it.
that simplified. Yeah. And in terms of the job, I think in terms of coding, for me, I ended up working on front end quite a bit, which was
Hmm.
very much same as what I was interviewed for, I would say.
Hmm.
But I also ended up working on like quite a bit on the back end side, which again I did not interview for. But if I can like prove that I know like basics of engineering and all that, I can like work wherever. So
Got
that's I
it.
would say is on the like the coding side. But I
Hmm.
think the biggest part in Meta is that how do you work with people, right? Because here barely teams work in silos, that there's like a team of 7 engineers, they work together. It's
Yeah.
pretty much always you are working with another team in another location or something like
Right.
that, right?
Right.
So I think dealing with people, working with people, that's the biggest that you face on the job apart from like writing code, and that's
Hmm.
not something you are specifically tested on when you are interviewing.
Hmm. Right.
So for me this was the biggest learning, and I think the biggest delta between the interview and the job in particular. Yeah.
Oh, awesome, awesome. So, by the way, what are your primary languages that you have worked at Meta? Programming languages,
Yeah.
if I have to be precise.
So it's not a wide set. So it's
Hmm.
basically a JavaScript, which I mean, we all front-end folks are good at. So apart from that, yeah, Meta infamously uses Hack, which is like essentially PHP. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's PHP and Hack. And yeah, so I think this is pretty much like 95% of meta tech stack, PHP, React.
Oh,
Yeah, it's very ubiquitous, but these two are the main ones. Yeah,
awesome, awesome. Good to hear that. So this was an awesome discussion, Abhishek. Basically, so people are going to love it. Basically, the way you have illustrated all of the journey and the expectation when you join Meta. Basically, why did you give some advice to the people who are actually looking into getting into the Meta? People have a lot of noises in terms of the,
yeah,
you
yeah.
can say, the tough time and whatnot, microeconomic condition. So, but again, so what are your thoughts? What are your advice in terms of getting into the Meta and growing it company?
I think, yeah, to get into meta in particular, I think the good thing is we wish to, like, somehow we are averse to like reading DSA only for interviews. You don't have to do that. That's the best thing. So for me, I would personally suggest that cliche advice, but you have to be very good with basics of JavaScript, like in and out, you should know it all, right? Once that foundation is there, I think it's always about uh, do practical problems, right? So
Mhm.
big frontend.dev is an example. So, but you can actually on your, in your on your own, you can come up with simple problems in frontend and be
Mhm.
able to like code them up like in and time box thing, right? So you should be able to solve a problem in 15 minutes, 10 minutes, and reason about it, things like that,
Mhm.
right? So I think focusing on fundamentals of JS, focusing on solving practical problems is the way to go, I will say. And apart from that, I think very important rounds end up being system design and behavioral, right? So
Mhm.
these rounds, those sound very different from each other. The
Yeah.
idea is for the interviewer to understand how you think in the end, right? Like about a system or about uh, generally problems, organizations, dealing with people. So I think having a very good internalized understanding of your body of work over time and how you like, solve things, think about things, that's very important. So I think, yeah, having good clarity of your work, your resume, that's key. Yeah,
So, which brought us to an interesting point, which is most of the people think about just building the feature in the existing product, not thinking about the high level impact they are driving, right? But as you
yeah,
mentioned in system design round, and especially when you are going to discuss with your hiring manager and whatnot, your past work and illustrating those things in the right fashion, what kind of impact that you have driven, not just talking about individual snippet or the features that you have delivered, but the
right,
impact is
right.
something which is very important. And you should also work whenever you're working on anything, you should always have on back of mind what is the impact that I'm going to drive from whatever I'm building,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
going to be a key factor when you go into the interview also.
very much. So I think I can add one thing on this, right, on behavioral or system design.
Hmm.
Uh, so usually, even at Meta and many companies, now they don't have like these, we are not hiring for SD2, 3 or something, right? They
Uh-huh.
usually just take an interview and assess you how you're doing, right?
Correct.
So the rounds, the system design round and the behavioral round, right? These are the key differentiators which like, differentiate between a senior and a regular engineer, like software engineer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll say, even this was my learning after coming into the company, that for
Hmm.
system design, right? If you're like, focusing on something, you're very zoomed in when you're thinking about
Hmm.
things, it's not a good thing. You always
Hmm.
have to think broad, right? You have to consider everything and then you have to drill down, right? So that's about system design. And
Hmm.
for like behavioral, right? So whenever you're talking about your work, if you're only talking about like yourself, right? How you did
Hmm.
something, never about how you worked in a team, the
Yeah.
challenge you face with that, you will never come across as a senior engineer. So yeah,
Definitely. That's a very good advice, Abhishek, that you have given, especially in terms of system design, thinking broadly, then getting in the deeper and basically talking about the other side. Like thinking
yeah,
about the team. We is very important that we
yeah.
have
V is very
taught
important.
from
That's right.
the childhood. Instead of I, we should think about we because that derive a big company, what makes a meta basically, right?
Yeah.
So that was an awesome thing. Anything that you wanted to advise in terms of in people who are actually working in the company, how they should think in terms of growing in their organization
Yeah.
instead of thinking of switching between the companies in order to get
Yeah.
the hike.
I think, yeah, I think that I totally agree with. I think after a few hops, you also realize, right? If I really want to grow as an engineer, I have to stay really, right? Because that's where the real problems are. Cracking interviews, I would say, relatively easy than like, growing in a company. But yeah, so on the advice front, I think I will say, um, generally, having a mindset shift in terms of being a problem solver. Because I think at times in your team or in your organization, right, you will see that let's say you're a front end engineer, you'll find something simple to do somewhere, but you don't have an expertise in some other area. You'll say that, this is not my area, I'll not do it. But
Yeah.
you have to always have a problem solver mindset, right? If you know there's a big problem that the company needs to be addressed, right? You should be able
Mhm.
to jump in. I think it's all about mindset shift. So don't stick to a niche. Don't be a product front end engineer or a back end engineer. I think being a product engineer and just trying to solve a problem with code is something that will take you like long way, I think. Yeah.
That was an awesome advice. I think thinking about engineer instead of me being this engineer or that engineer, because
Yeah.
ultimately your goal is to get to solve the problem for the end customers. That is an
Yeah.
awesome. This is really an awesome podcast that we had, and thanks a lot, Abhishek, for coming down and sharing a lot of
Thanks
insightful
so much, man.
thing.